What is going on, EDSU 531? My name is Ezekiel, along with Christopher Cobb and Jilliene Davidson. We are going to be talking today about Frederick Jones. I was going to say Frederick Douglass. Frederick Jones, the education philosopher. We're going to give you a little bit about his background information, where he went to school, how he ultimately developed his theory, what that theory looks like in a traditional classroom along with a modern classroom as well. And then ultimately we're going to go over some of the pros and cons of the theory and just go ahead and evaluate and deliberate on that. So I'm going to go ahead and kick that over to Jilliene Davis. Jill, go ahead and take it away.
For teaching to be enjoyable, you must be able to simply relax and teach. Classroom management must be built from the ground up so that most problems don't occur. That was a quote from Dr. Fred Jones. He received his PhD in clinical psychology from UCLA, specializing in working with schools and families. Dr. Jones has studied highly successful teachers for more than 30 years. In the process, he has developed methods of classroom management and written several books to help support teachers in the classroom setting. In 1979, Frederick Jones conducted a study. He found that nearly 50% of teaching time was wasted due to children's misbehavior and disruptions, of which approximately 80% was spent talking in class. Jones suggested that teachers could work on not losing that valuable time by implementing the following techniques: setting limits, effective body language, student incentives, more engagement, more cooperation, more mutual respect between teachers and students, differential reinforcement, and students self-manage their own behavior. When students are managing their own behavior, this gives teachers more time for instruction and working in the classroom, rather than disciplining or causing disruptions. Focus on the classroom. Dr. Jones has developed research-based methods of group management that free the teacher to focus on instruction rather than discipline. Advanced skills of classroom management can produce dramatic increases in student learning while reducing teacher stress.
Thank you for that, Jill, and for that brief and thorough explanation. Now we're going to go ahead and show a quick clip of Dr. Fred Jones discussing some of his practices and theories and ideas.
You ever noticed you get the same cast of characters in your classroom every year? You know, the first year you thought, I have some weird little kids in here, but I'll matriculate them out of here in June, and next year they'll be gone. Next year, same kids, different bodies. You know, same little characters come walking in, and you think, didn't I have you last year in a different body? Heard of it. But I say to these high school teachers, just be glad you're not an elementary school teacher. Elementary school teacher doesn't just take roll. They've got lunch money. They've got book club money. They've got milk money. They've got trip money. When you graduate, they ought to give you one of those nickel dime quarter changers that you use on a streetcar and just go around and spend the first 5 minutes. Let's see, you had the special lunch and the chocolate milk. Did you bring your $1.50 for the field trip? Just change money for the first 5-10 minutes of the period. Don't care. I have never known a bunch of kids who said, would you please have the highest standards possible so that I can turn out the maximum work this year? I've never seen that. And they have all these skills they use, you know, in order to back you down. You know, there's the eye roll. We're going to have assigned seating. 30 kids go, oh. Yes, I was.
I wasn't.
Were too. Was too. Is this a stupid conversation? And finally it boils down. Were too, was not. Were too, was not. First rule of backtalk. Takes one fool to backtalk. It takes two fools to make conversation out of it. Now, in the classroom, I call it smiley face. You say the kid's name, and the kid responds like this. Fred. You ever seen that face look back at you? Oh, let me off the hook. I'm so cute. You ever have a kid in your class that thought they could just skate through education by being cute? They don't follow the rules, they don't do the work, but boy, are they cute. You ever seen this in your class? Breaks your heart, doesn't it? Now, the problem with this position, this is known as the beginner position, the problem with this position is that the blood drains out of your hand, and it starts to go numb, and then you get a pinprickly feeling all over the skin. Now, what if I'm on the far side of the room, and before the teacher gets to that side of the room, they're going to help this kid for 3 or 4 minutes, this kid for 3 or 4 minutes, maybe another kid for 3 or 4 minutes. You get tired of holding your hand up for 10 minutes waiting to get help.
It becomes evident in just a few minutes that Dr. Jones knows what's going on in our classrooms.
So this kid's thinking, there's got to be an easier way to be a student in a classroom. And one day they look up, and some kid models the answer for them. And it looks like this. You ever seen this one? This is called half-mast. And the beauty with half-mast is that the blood returns to my hand, and I can hold this forever.
Boy, that Dr. Jones is quite a character. Man, I could see why his teachings definitely have impacted a lot of people. Now I'm going to go over the application of Dr. Jones's theory and really just talk about some of the things that he says. So Jones also believes that students need abundance of hands-on activities. This keeps students engaged and focused on new materials. I'm going to talk about this in both a traditional and a modern setting. So examples of traditional hands-on activities include card games, dice, and board games. These are appropriate for all grade levels. Specific ones that were mentioned for primary hands-on activities were sensory tables. Sensory tables play encourages open-minded thinking, language development, collaboration, and builds fine motor skills. Sensory materials are magically both engaging and calming. For secondary school hands-on activities, model lungs and heart pumps. Those have definitely been around for a long time, and I always remember whenever I got to cut things or do anything like that with a hands-on activity in secondary school, always a fun time. Definitely keep those in mind. So we are also going to talk about how this looks in a more modern classroom like today. So in a more modern classroom of hands-on activities, there was listed as 3D printing, gamification, and mobile technology, which is appropriate for all grade levels. The main primary hands-on activity that was listed for this was 3D printing. If resources are available, 3D printing is a good primary school hands-on activity for students as early as 3rd grade. For secondary school, hands-on activities include gamification, which as students become older, they are able to create ways to remember information. By having students create the information that they learned into a game, this is engaging their higher order thinking and have a higher probability of learning this. The other thing that Dr. Jones talks about is PAT, which does not stand for point after touchdown in this situation. So PAT refers to preferred activity time. This is when students can earn points to play a fun game. Dr. Jones believes that these genuine incentives help students learn while giving the students the power to choose them. Examples of traditional PAT include art projects, math games, and reading time, which is appropriate for all grade reading levels. An example of a traditional primary PAT time would be charades. An example of a modern PAT time would be online educational games, such as cool math games, which is appropriate for all grade levels. So Dr. Jones has made an emphasis that PAT does not give the students rewards, but a time of choice. In PAT, students still take on responsibility through positive reinforcement. And then lastly, how does this look through, to teachers? So Dr. Jones believes that there are specific characteristics that help create an effective teacher. So the first thing they got to do is conserve time, which they must mean business, define limits of behavior, keep students engaged, and increase motivation through incentives. Jones also believes that teachers have the power to do two things: motivate students and create effective classroom management. By doing this, teachers simply need to keep their students engaged and not waste time in the process, which is a lot easier said than done, as we all know in a classroom of today. We're going to go ahead and pass it over to Chris Cobb to go ahead and close this out, he talks about some of the pros and cons of this theory of Dr. Jones's philosophy. Go ahead, Chris. Thank you so much.
Hi, my name is Chris Cobb, and then I'll be covering the strengths and weaknesses of Frederick Jones's positive discipline model. I'm going to start with weaknesses. The first weakness I want to cover is that it's a system, and systems require implementation and training, and there's only so much time in a teacher's day. And in this class alone, we're covering 7 different classroom management models. So researching those models and figuring out if they would be effective in your classroom takes time. So does measuring effectiveness once you've implemented them. So that's a weakness of all systems of classroom management. Another weakness is that it requires a level of executive function for activities like preferred activity time, and in lower grades that might not be super practical and feasible. Then the final weakness that I'm going to cover is that it requires body language as a form of boundary setting and behavior reinforcement. And while that can be effective for the large majority of your students, in some cases, teachers are going to be either less effective than their peers at using body language or in eye contact and things like that. Might be cultural differences, for instance, with norms around eye contact and things like that between you and your students' native culture. And finally, students don't come into your classroom as a blank slate. They bring a whole slew of experiences and memories into your classroom along with them. And sometimes something that works for some students, for instance, like proximity to limit negative behavior, might be a trigger for them. Perhaps proximity triggers a trauma response for them and actually creates behavior issues. So that's something to keep in mind as a teacher. I'm moving to strengths now. Now, right off the bat, I want to go into the fact that this is a scalable solution. You can implement it in steps. Perhaps you start with your body language 1 week, or with starting out, and then you move on to into something once you've perfected it. Now, the largest strength of this system, in my opinion, is that it utilizes teachable strategies. You're going to be teaching your students how to behave using positive reinforcement. And by using positive reinforcement, you're able to focus on the positive behaviors and reinforce those rather than drawing attention to the negative ones. Another thing that I think is particularly effective is that it uses whole class incentives and doesn't just target the highest achievers for incentives and the lowest the behavior issues for the punishment or discipline. And finally, it promotes prevention of negative behaviors through that positive.
Sorry to cut you off there, Chris. Unfortunately, we are running out of time for this video. If our viewers would like to learn more about Dr. Fred Jones, you can visit his website at fredjones.com, where you will find books, videos, and forums, all talking about his theory and other resources as well. Again, that is fredjones.com. Also, feel free to look him up on YouTube. On behalf of Jilliene Davidson, Christopher Cobb, and Ezekiel Esquibel, myself, thank you so much for watching our video.